In recognition of his outstanding international news coverage over more than 4 decades as a correspondent for CBS News and 60 Minutes, in light of his courageous reporting from dangerous theaters of war in Vietnam, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Europe, in acknowledgement of the chilling account of his imprisonment in Iraq in his book, 40 Days, we present the Overseas Press Club's President's Award to Bob Simon.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'd forgotten about so much of this stuff. It makes me feel privileged to be here, not only in the Mandarin, but on the planet. About 15 years ago, Dan Rather introduced me on the CBS Evening News as our veteran correspondent, Bob Simon. I didn't like that very much. Felt like I was leaving active service or had already left, but nobody had bothered to tell me, which has happened before at CBS. So tonight, I'm not being called a veteran correspondent, I'm getting a lifetime award. That really freaks me out. In 1969, CBS assigned me to the London Bureau, so I hopped right over to Burberry's and bought a trench coat. When I got to London, Charles Collingwood took me to his bespoke tailor, Nutter's, and had me fitted with a dark blue striped suit, the kind that had real buttonholes. A few days later, there were troubles in Belfast, so I went up there and spent most of the next 2 years there. Then I was assigned to Vietnam for a year and left there in time to cover the Yom Kippur War, and it's been like that ever since. I've hardly ever worn that Nutter suit. I guess I could now, but of course I'd never fit in it. Normal people think we're insane, and they're right. The only question is whether covering all those wars makes us crazy or whether we were bonkers to begin with, which is what made us do it. I think for my generation, it was largely an overdose of Hemingway when we were too young to digest it. Hemingway covered the liberation of Paris from the bar at the Ritz Hotel. Our natural habitats have been a bit more modest. The Continental in Saigon, the glorious Royale in Phnom Penh, where the war was 5 miles away and paradise was on the premises. The Nicosia Hilton, the Sheikh Shamu in Mogadishu, the Holiday Inn in Sarajevo. Now, of course, it's the American colony in Jerusalem. If peace ever comes to the Middle East, we'll have no reason to stay there anymore. Sadly, I don't think they're going to lose our business for a generation or two. At the Commodore Hotel in Beirut in 1982, the Israelis were bombing all night, so we couldn't get much sleep. To pass the time, we made phone calls, international calls to sources all over the world. Then a vicious rumor started circulating that Yusuf Nadal, the wonderful, resourceful manager of the Commodore, was putting our bar bills in the phone calls column. Can you imagine the treachery? But we couldn't ignore it. You can't fight a rumor, so we cut down on our phone bills. But then suddenly and mysteriously, our laundry bills shot up. It made sense. I mean, we may have been in a war zone, but we had to look neat and good. We were, after all, foreign correspondents. I think it is humor more than anything else that keeps us somewhat sane during the traumas, and we've all had them. I suffered my worst in Poland in 1978. I had done a few predictable political stories and then started were lining up a religious story. I called the spokesman for Cardinal Winczynski, the primate of Poland, and asked him to set up an interview. He said he'd get back to me, but of course he didn't. This went on for several days, and finally I called him and said, look, I'm leaving for London the day after tomorrow, so it's now or never. He said he couldn't get me the cardinal, but he could offer the Archbishop of Krakow. I said, forget it, and flew back to London. You see where this is going. 3 months later, the Archbishop of Krakow became Pope John Paul II. I had blown off an interview with the Pope. That happened 36 years ago, but I still think about it now and then, usually an hour or two before dawn, staring at the ceiling, mumbling one of my grandson's nursery rhymes. The wheels on the bus. Normal people always complain that we're superficial, shallow, biased, hyperbolic, careless, and they've got a case. Sometimes we make the case for them. What I usually say is, listen, as deeply flawed as we are, we're all you've got. Most of us try to tell it like it is, and we succeed some of the time, which distinguishes us from politicians, governments, lobbies, bankers, hedge funders, stockbrokers, spokesmen, and women of all stripes. Compared to those guys, even when we only get it half right, we are angels of truth. But we have done, I must admit, a good job now and then. I think our coverage of Vietnam contributed to America's revulsion with the war. I think our coverage of Sarajevo made it difficult for Clinton not to send in troops, even if he should have done so a lot earlier. When he left office, Clinton said one of his biggest regrets was not having intervened in Rwanda. In 1995, McNamara came out with a long list of mistakes he had made in Vietnam. I wonder how long it'll take George W. Bush to whisper a mea culpa or two for Iraq. I'm not hanging by my fingernails. They're not long enough. But it's easy to blame it all on Bush. I think we, correspondents, bear some responsibility. With all our resources, we didn't call Bush's bluff in time, before it was too late. The information was out there. Among other sources, the Israelis knew Saddam had no WMD. If he'd had, the Israelis would have destroyed them. But hey, the Israelis told me, hey, if the Americans want to zap Saddam, feel free. We won't take it personally. But somehow we didn't get the message out powerfully enough to block the stupidest war in American history. Maybe it couldn't have been done, but I still think we could have done more than we did. My first day at CBS in 1967, the news editor, Ralph Passman, who could have played himself in the movie, said, Simon, don't believe anything they ever tell you, including things you tell yourself. I've never forgotten that one. Sorry, I always run into this problem. Giving a Lifetime Award is a curious thing when you give it to a reporter, because you're actually giving it to many people. In my case, the guy who covered Vietnam is not the same guy who covered Cyprus, who's different from the reporter who covered Somalia, and so on. It's like that for all of us because war is an intense experience and it changes you, even if you don't realize it at the time. Everyone changes you, so it's really a bunch of creatures hovering under one persona you're honoring tonight, and they all thank you very much. Thanks in particular to Jeff Fager, who never questioned our laundry bills, and who stood by us during some of our very dark times, to Françoise and Tanya, who provided havens of love between the horrors, and of course to the OPC. I really didn't expect this. Thanks a lot.